The gospel text of today continues from the Gospel of John, and we come now to the second day in the Gospel of John. The text is taken from John chapter 1, verses 29 to 34, and begins by telling us that it is the next day. What happens on this second day? If on the first day, John identified himself by saying who he was not and who he was, on this second day, today's gospel, John will identify Jesus. When he sees Jesus coming, John uses 4 titles in order to identify this Lord. And the first of these titles is the most important one. It is that Jesus is the Lamb of God. Why is it the most important one? In his passion narrative, in the chronology which John gives us, John will tell us in John chapter 19, verse 14, when Pilate sat on the judgment seat and pronounced judgment on Jesus, John will add a time reference there. It was about the 6th hour. What happened on the 6th hour, at the day of preparation for the Passover? What happened was that the paschal lambs were slaughtered in the temple. In other words, by identifying Jesus as the Lamb of God right at the beginning of the gospel, the evangelist and John the Baptist are both saying to us that this Jesus is the Lamb who will be led to the slaughter, the paschal lamb who will be slaughtered for the sins of the whole world. The second title which John the Baptist uses to identify Jesus is that Jesus is the pre-existent one. In his prologue, the evangelist has already told us that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. In other words, John the Baptist knows that even though Jesus is born after him, he actually existed before him, and is able to identify Jesus as the pre-existent one. The third title which John the Baptist uses to identify Jesus is that Jesus is the carrier of the Spirit. Jesus is the vehicle of the Spirit. Jesus carries the Spirit with him and gives the Spirit to whoever is open. In other words, Jesus is both the carrier and the communicator of the Spirit. Only Jesus can communicate the Spirit in this unique and extraordinary way. And the fourth title, which is the climax, is that Jesus is Son of God. Jesus has been sent by God, not to condemn the world, as John will tell us a little later in chapter 3, verse 16, but Jesus has been sent as Son of God to save the world from itself. So in his identification of Jesus, John is very clear that Jesus is first Lamb of God, Jesus is the pre-existent one, Jesus is the carrier or the vehicle of the Spirit, and Jesus is Son of God. Which of these 4 titles do you prefer to use for Jesus, and why?